All right, today we're jumping into a book that has been called the loveliest book in the world. Seriously, it's filled with some of the most famous stories you've ever heard, but it all kicks off with a real mystery. So let's get into it.
Here's the central question. Who actually wrote the Gospel of Luke? See, unlike a modern book, there's no author's name printed on the cover. So we're going to have to put on our detective hats and follow the clues to figure out who's behind this ancient masterpiece.
So the first thing you notice when you start reading is that the author never comes out and says, "Hey, I'm Bob, and I wrote this." The work is technically anonymous. So where do you even start? Well, lucky for us, the author left a huge clue right at the beginning.
In his own introduction, the author admits something fascinating. He says, look, I wasn't there to see Jesus' life myself. Instead, he says he's a historian, someone who has carefully investigated everything from the very beginning, interviewing the people who were there to write an orderly account. This tells us right away we're looking for an investigator, not a direct witness.
Okay, so if the author isn't named in the Gospel, how in the world do we find him? Well, we have to look for his fingerprints, his textual DNA. And the biggest clues aren't just in the Gospel of Luke, but in its sequel, the Book of Acts, which pretty much everyone agrees was written by the same person.
That's right. Luke Acts is basically a 2-volume work. And it's in that second volume, the story of the early church, that our author kind of accidentally steps out from behind the curtain and reveals he was there for some of the action in a few very specific and very telling passages. For most of the Book of Acts, the story is told in the third person. You know, Paul did this, they went there. But then, all of a sudden, the pronoun switches to we. In Acts 16, the author says we sailed from Troas. Later, we stayed in Philippi. He even says we were on that terrifying sea voyage to Rome. The conclusion is pretty much inescapable. The author was a loyal, traveling companion of the Apostle Paul. So this lets us do a little detective work, a process of elimination. If you list all of Paul's buddies that we know about from his letters, you can start crossing them off. Timothy, Aristarchus, Mark, they're all mentioned by name in the third person during these we sections, so it can't be them. We can also cross off guys who weren't loyal to the end, like Demas. And when all the dust settles, there's only one major, loyal companion left who is never named during these travelogues, a guy named Luke.
And here's where another piece of the puzzle just clicks perfectly into place. In his letter to the Colossians, Paul mentions a man named Luke, calling him the beloved physician. So could our author, the historian, the traveling companion, also be a doctor? Let's see if the writing itself gives us any clues.
You know, scholars have pointed this out for centuries. The language in Luke's Gospel often feels, well, a little more clinical. For instance, when describing the exact same healing story, another Gospel writer might talk about the general suffering. But Luke, he often uses more precise, almost medical-sounding language to describe the illness. It's a subtle clue, but it's a powerful one that seems to confirm that our author was in fact Luke the physician.
Okay, so we've pretty much identified our author, but that's only half the mystery, right? Now we have to ask, who is he writing for and why? And the answer to that question starts with a name that pops up in the very first verse of his Gospel.
Luke addresses his entire 2-volume work to a man named Theophilus. Now, the name itself just means lover of God, but it's the title he gives him, most excellent. That's the real tell. This wasn't just a friendly hello, it was a formal title used for high-ranking officials in the Roman Empire. So Theophilus was very likely a prominent, educated Roman convert, or maybe even a wealthy patron who paid for the whole project of researching and writing this history.
And this context is absolutely everything. For a Roman official like Theophilus, Christianity was this new, strange, and often misunderstood movement from the provinces. So Luke tells him exactly why he's writing, to give him a carefully researched, accurate, and orderly account so that Theophilus could be certain of the things he'd been taught. This wasn't just a collection of nice stories. It was a well-constructed historical defense of the faith designed to stand up to the scrutiny of the educated and probably skeptical Greco-Roman world.
And this, right here, is what makes Luke's contribution so unbelievably unique. It makes him number one in a very, very specific way. He is widely believed to be the only Gentile, that is, a non-Jewish person, to author a book in the entire Bible. Every other writer was Jewish, writing from a deeply Jewish perspective. Luke is the one who builds a bridge to the wider world, translating this story for a completely different culture. His perspective wasn't just helpful, it was absolutely essential.
So how did this unique background, being a Greek doctor, writing for a Roman official, actually shape the content of his gospel? Well, as you might guess, his focus is profoundly different from the other writers, and you can see it in the themes that really define his work.
This table really gets to the heart of what makes Luke's Gospel Luke's.
Just look at these themes. He writes a universal gospel. When he gives Jesus his genealogy, he doesn't stop at Abraham, the father of the Jewish people. He goes all the way back to Adam, the father of all humanity. It's a gospel for the down and out, packed with stories you won't find anywhere else, like the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son, stories that champion the poor and the marginalized. It's often called the woman's gospel, for the incredible respect and prominent roles he gives to women like Mary, Elizabeth, and Anna. And finally, it's just a gospel of pure rejoicing, full of songs and declarations of joy from the first chapter all the way to the last.
So when you put all of this together, what you have is a writer with a truly dual legacy. He wasn't just one thing. He was a master of two completely different crafts blended together. On the one hand, you have Luke, the meticulous historian. I mean, archaeologists and scholars have praised him for his stunning accuracy. He nails the names of local rulers, gets the cultural details right, and his geography is on point. But on the other hand, you have Luke the artist. This is the guy who gave us the timeless, gut-wrenching beauty of the prodigal son parable and the powerful poetry of Mary's song, the Magnificat. It is so rare to find this combination in ancient texts. He was both a recorder of facts and a masterful storyteller, creating something that was both totally credible and deeply captivating. And in the end, maybe this quote from the scholar William Barclay says it best. The ancient symbol for Luke's gospel is the calf, which was an animal of sacrifice, because more than any other writer, Luke, the Greek doctor, the historian, the companion of Paul, saw Jesus not just for one group of people, but as the sacrifice for the entire world. Jew and Gentile, rich and poor, man and woman, all of them. He really did write the loveliest book in the world, because he wrote it for all the world.